Hey fam, welcome to the Freetrail Podcast and our new presenting sponsor. We're so happy to now be working with The Feed. Thefeed.com/Freetrail is where you need to go. It is the one-stop shop for all your training and racing nutrition needs. They have over 200 of the world's best nutrition brands stocked in one website. It's a fantastic resource. We've been big customers for a long time. We're really proud to work with them. Some of my favorite products that you can find at thefeed.com/Freetrail. Gnarly Nutrition Whey Protein Powder. I like the chocolate flavor. I have some of this after every one of my workouts and long runs. For in-run nutrition, Orange Drank. You'll see my big dumb face on it. Also from Gnarly Nutrition, enhanced sodium concentration here in the world's best fueling drink mix. Finally, HVMN, Ketone IQ. I have 2 of these ketone shots basically every single day, once before I go running and once in the middle of the afternoon when I need a little extra energy. Go to thefeed.com/Freetrail and you're going to get an $80 credit, free money to spend at thefeed.com. It'll be $20 right away and then $20 every 90 days thereafter. You'll also get a sweet Trail Running Will Save the World water bottle. Again, that's thefeed.com/Freetrail. You'll get $80 credit to spend on your favorite nutrition products. And if you are international, they do ship internationally as well. So you can take care or at least take advantage of that great offering from The Feed. Big thanks to The Feed for supporting, and thank you for watching the podcast. Jeff Browning, welcome back to the Freetrail Podcast, buddy. Good to see you.
Thanks, buddy. It's good to be back.
Giddy up, as they say.
Yes.
It's funny. Last time you were here, I just went back and checked. It was March 2023. So it's been, 15 months or so. And we got a lot to catch up on. You've done a lot of cool stuff since. And you have a massive adventure, potentially the biggest adventure of your career right around the corner.
It is the project of my life.
The project of your life. Okay. So what a tease to start the podcast. But in reviewing our last podcast, I realized that it was before I introduced my new traditional opening question. And it's always leads to some of my favorite answers on the podcast. So I have to put you on the record here, Mr. Jeff Browning, with my traditional opening question. That is, what makes you, you? What are your unique strengths and weaknesses? How do they show up in your life?
I am a hard-headed, stubborn, spaz. That's probably the best. I mean, ask my wife of, we've been together 31 years, married 27 years. And so we've been together since we were 21 and 18. And I've just turned 53. So it gives us a long history. And I have trouble sitting still. I get things in my head and I have to follow through. I am an entrepreneur. I have ideas. I sometimes follow through on those ideas. Sometimes they sit in my brain forever. But I really have trouble being still. So I think ultra running is the perfect sport for that type of person. We have to focus every single day. And so, but I'm also like, I want to be a better person. I want to be a better dad. I want to be a better husband. Sometimes I fail on those a lot, because I think I can get in my own head and I can, be so uber focused on something that I have trouble like taking the blinders off for a bit. So that is definitely my weakness, is being able to just take a deep breath and like enjoy the moment sometimes, because I'm always trying to move to the next thing.
Interesting. So in saying that about your wife, it made me remember a post that you put up celebrating your 27 years of marriage. And it said something to the effect of, you know me better than I know myself. So if we asked her what makes Jeff, would she answer in the same way, do you think?
I doubt she'd answer the same.
Yeah.
She probably has her own insight there. And I'll let her have her own opinion on that one, because she's definitely got some experience and she sees it from that side. I do appreciate her support though, because she does let me be me for sure.
As all great partnerships, that's kind of the key to all great partnerships, right? Let your partner be them and you be you, and where the intersection of those personalities and those Venn diagrams are where great partnerships are forged. You mentioned that you just turned 53. We're recording on August 6th, 2024 here. And you probably always get sick of being asked about your age, but I'm sure listeners would love to hear you talk about just like how you celebrated your birthday and, how body and mind are feeling after another lap around the sun. Happy birthday, by the way.
Thank you. It was on Saturday, so I'm 2 weeks out from the Colorado Trail teaser. I went to Mount Humphreys here locally, the highest point in Arizona. That's by Arizona Snow Bowl, about 30 minutes from my house, and did a double of Mount Humphreys. So it's about 18 and a half miles with Pete Mortimer. So that was my morning. We got up early and hit a double there. And then we had a drink or two in the parking lot, celebrate my birthday. And then I went down and had lunch with my family, and my oldest two have significant others now. But, if you're 53, I've got a 22-year-old and an 18-year-old, almost 19. So we brought their boyfriend and girlfriend with us, and we all went to lunch, and I overate because I had run two giant mornings, and I'd fasted that morning. So before the run. So I was starving by the time we ate at like 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So we just kind of hung out. I went to a movie with my kids that night. My older two went and saw Deadpool and Wolverine.
Nice.
And that was my birthday, 53rd birthday.
What a day. What a perfect day. A fasted long run in the morning and then a couple drinks in the parking lot. I'm sure you were ready for a big lunch after that.
Big time.
I wanted to ask you about Ludovic Pomeray at Hard Rock, because I did a little pre-race interview with him prior to his course record victory. And it was clear that based on, his social media and his Strava, that you guys had bumped into each other somewhere around Handies in the days leading up to it. And obviously, Ludo, I sort of characterized as the European Jeff Browning. You guys are so inspiring to so many people, and how you've been able to exude and exemplify longevity over time and just like consistent high performance. So say a few words about Ludo's performance at Hard Rock, and maybe any conversations that the two of you had about still kicking ass after so many years in the sport.
Well, our paths had crossed the year before at Hard Rock when he came to help, and we were talking about the race, and he said, "Oh man, I really want to get in this." And and he kind of had the same feeling I have at times. If you can't get into something, you're like, man, I'm not getting any younger here. I need to get in this race, so he was feeling like his age, right? Like, I need to get in this race before I'm too old, before I slow down. And so when I saw him get in, and I was up training and acclimating for High Lonesome in the Colorado Trail, and I had done a circuit up and over Handies down through Burroughs and back up through American Basin. So I was doing a long run, and I was solo, and I came up into American Basin, was coming over the saddle where he dropped down to Grouse, and I knew a couple people that were in front of me that were going slower, and I caught up to them, and I'm Mr. Social. So I was like talking to them and stopped. And I see someone like flying up the hill, up over the saddle, and it's Ludo. So like we said, hey, and I patted him on the back, and we started running together, and he was doing a hard workout. Afterwards I found out he was going up Handies hard and back down. He was fully really light, hardly had anything in his pack, just had poles. So, and he flew down, and I saw how fast he was on the downhill. And I after he took off, because I was at the end of a long run, I kind of picked up the pace to see if I could just keep the gap the same. Mm-hmm. And I realized like how fast he was rolling downhill. And for me, I'd never seen him on really technical terrain on downhills. And for me, just as a coach, I was like, he's fit right now. And he's like, yeah, I know he's hungry because of his age. We're always hungry at our age. So if you're still training hard, you're hungry. And so, and he was putting in the work. And so I got down not too long after him, and he was sitting at his vehicle, and we hung out, drank a Coke together. He offered me a Coke. I sat down on the gravel, and we hung out, and chatted, and he kind of told me like, hey, I've been here for, I'm going to be here for 4 weeks. I've been here for 2 weeks already. I think that was 2 weeks out. And he'd already done soft rock, packed it. Then he'd already run it, supported. So he covered the course twice in that direction, and he was fit. Like I could just tell he was really fit. And so we just chatted, and he was just talking about how he's stoked to be there. And I could just tell he was stoked. And I was like, man, he's going to have I just thought he was going to have a good race. Like when you've been around as long as Ludo has, or I have, we don't like to make mistakes when it counts. And so I knew he'd run smart. I knew he'd run strong. I knew he was ready for the altitude. I knew he was ready for the vert. I knew he was a good downhiller. So, and he's a good climber too, but he's a really good downhiller. And so, Hard Rock's that type of race, right? If you can just climb well, hike well with poles, and then run downhill fast, like you're going to run Hard Rock pretty fast. So I knew he was ready, and that was why he was my pick when I was commentating.
What an incredible performance from him. And just another data point in the Ludo and Browning Inspiration Museum. But what you just said is interesting to me about when you get to our age, you don't like to make mistakes. And the way I'm interpreting that is that as you get older, you have less margin for error and you pay more attention to mitigating mistakes. Say more about that. What does that look like practically?
I mean, I think the big thing is like you have a lot of experience at that point. Like part of it is you're pulling from your experience so you don't make stupid mistakes. Now you still might make some mistakes, but hopefully they're minimal. I definitely was experimenting with my nutrition the first half of High Lonesome, and I made mistakes. That cost me probably second or third place. Definitely cost me the podium. But I also had a bigger goal in mind that I was testing for and messing around with some stuff that I needed to test in a long effort. So those are the kind of mistakes that are like calculated mistakes, but you don't make stupid mistakes like, oh, I'm just going to go out like an idiot and run way too hard and fast and then blow up. You're just not going to make those kind of mistakes. And usually by then you've kind of figured out your nutrition, hydration. You're not going to make major mistakes in that category. So, and if you don't make mistakes in pacing and you don't make mistakes in nutrition and hydration, then usually if you're fit and you're not fighting some weird thing, you don't have an injury, then you're hopefully going to run a solid race.
Yeah. Awesome. So obviously we're going to spend a lot of time talking about the Colorado Trail, something that is aptly named the Longevity Project. But before we do, I'm conscious that our listeners would love to hear you speak in more detail about a couple of things that you've done this season, Cocodona and High Lonesome, which you just mentioned. Cocodona, we'll start there. Listeners will remember that after leading for what felt like a couple of days,
165 miles. I added it up afterwards. I think you and I went back to our text. I think I said 155 to you, but I was still in like loopy land. But I actually went to my Strava and looked it up, and I was like, man, I led for so long.
Gosh, man, 160 plus miles in the lead, only to be caught in the final 2 miles by Harry Subertas, who went on to win the race. You finished second place. So that was your second 200-mile finish after winning Moab in 2022. And I'm sure there's mixed emotions about that. So maybe we'll
it's a little bittersweet for sure.
Yeah. So maybe talk about that real quick, just like the mix of emotions at Cocodona about being in the lead for such a long time, only to be caught and passed so late because, you posted on your Strava sort of an appreciation of, wow, how cool it was to be competing all the way to the finish line in a race that took 60 hours. But I'm sure you also do the counterfactual, self-criticism of like where you could have, held him off or where you could have done a little bit better to secure that victory. So how are you thinking about Cocodona with 3 months of perspective?
I mean, the biggest thing is I'm just like, I appreciate this sport a lot and just the camaraderie that comes along with this sport, even at the front of the pack when you're like duking it out. But I really appreciate competition too. And I couldn't have run that fast without him breathing down my neck the whole second half of the race. It was String Bean breathing down my neck the first half of the race, and then him breathing down my neck the second half of the race. When someone's only 3 or 4 miles behind you, during a 200, that isn't very much. That gap can close obviously very quickly if you are challenged in any way. And so, for me, like I learned some stuff I'd never dealt with reactive airway. And so I didn't know what to do. I had no tool in my toolbox for that. My crew, the behind the scenes, to their credit, were doing everything. And Peter Defty at Vespa, we're on the phone with my wife and my crew chief and George Plomerity, and they were going back and forth trying to figure out, can we get Jeff an inhaler prescription, right? We were just trying to find anything that would like chill out this breathing thing that I was restricted in my airway. And in hindsight, after talking to docs and stuff, like that would have done the trick. One or two hits off of a, inhaler probably would have put it in just enough, chilled it out enough for me to get air through my throat again. Cause I could only get air through my nose. And which was brutal the last 40 miles.
What do you attribute that to? I mean, is it just like an overuse injury of your breathing apparatus or something?
Best guess, based on multiple docs that are friends and running it by everyone, is I had a pretty bad upper respiratory thing like 3 weeks out. Like got sick. I probably overtrained a little bit, and knocked myself down, got sick. My kids got sick. You know this. You have a family. Yeah. Like when kids get sick, you're always like, as an athlete, you're, oh crap, not in the house. It's everywhere. It's on surfaces. It's everywhere. We share toilets, like you're like, washing your hands like you're going into surgery, and like, but sometimes you can't avoid it. Right. And so, especially when you're in a really bad, big training cycle and everything's knocked down. So I got sick. I healed up about a week out, like with no symptoms, like the hack you have for a while after upper respiratory, it moves into your lungs a little bit. So I was definitely dealing with that up until about a week before with symptoms. So even if they're minor symptoms. And so after talking to docs, they're like, yeah, you still have a viral load. Like, even though you don't have symptoms, you're still carrying a viral load. And then you put yourself in 3 days, 2 nights of full stress. Right. Yep. And the body goes into a cytokine storm and then it comes out in some way. And in mine, it came out as a reactive airway. So that's the best guess. And probably the dust on day one, which was really bad on Senator Highway on the way to Prescott. It was really dusty. We're going in the front. We're going through in prime time when like ATVs, motorcycles, boom, 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 blowing by. It was windy. It was really dusty and windy at the start or check-in the day before. Like there were whirlwind dust storms going around. It was super dusty. And the pollen count was at a peak, which is normally at a peak like 3 or 4 weeks before the race in April, not May. And so we had kind of a late spring with like more cold and moisture. So I think it probably was like that perfect storm,
Yeah, it's funny. It's like you hear of so many different things that go wrong, like I rolled my ankle or I couldn't see. I had eye problems in the middle of the night. And you eventually, I guess, encounter every single possible challenge in these races.
Exactly. 24 years of, 24 years of racing, like over 200 ultra marathons. I've never had a breathing. I've had the high altitude hack at like Hard Rock, you get towards the second half of the race and then after the race, that's pretty normal pushing at altitude, but like to have this swell up to where I couldn't, it was just like,
that's so bizarre.
It was a trip.
So sort of similar question to what I just asked about Ludo. I'd love to hear you talk about Harry a little bit because I watched the video of you finishing and Harry comes up and congratulates you, obviously. And he actually says, you deserved this, which made me feel like he almost felt bad for winning in the way that he did. Obviously, it was all fair and square. He seems like a stand-up guy. I don't know him personally. He also went on to win the Tahoe 200, but I wondered if you two had had any exchanges after the fact, if there's anything you can say about Harry.
We did both before when he passed me and afterwards we chatted quite a bit, but when he said the same thing when he passed me during the race, because it was in the back of Buffalo Park. Like the trail comes up into Buffalo Park, and I just gone into the last climb. It's the last rocky section before you come into the like gravel pathway in Buffalo Park. So as I'm going up that and I'm hiking it really slow, I can barely breathe. I'm having to stop about every 30 yards and like put my hands on my knees and do like 3 or 4 inhales through my nose, out exhales through my nose, trying to get air. You know, it was just like, it was brutal. I couldn't even really run anymore. I mean, I could jog slow for like 20 yards, and then I'd have to stop and breathe to catch back up. And so I kept looking over my shoulder because I was like, I know he's coming, because my pacers on the track are going, yeah, dude, he's like a quarter mile behind us, you know? And I knew he was closing the gap. And so when I saw him come down into the wash and running, and he was running with his pacer and I'm walking, I turned, and there happened to be a log on the trail. I sat on the log and sat down and just waited for him to run up. And
it's just the ultimate surrender at that point.
Dude, I was like, done. I was like, I'm not even going to try. And so I sat down and I knew it was inevitable, you know?
Yeah.
And I was just like, he comes running up, and I go, and I can only whisper at this point.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm talking like the Godfather. And I was like, Harry, you get the win, man. And I wish I would have said, Bronco Billy sleeps with the fishes. But I wasn't that with it at the moment. So I didn't have any kind of good quip to come back with. But he came up and gave me a hug, and he kind of sat there for a second and was like, man, what happened? And I was like, I can't breathe.
Yeah.
And he was like, oh man, you deserve this win or whatever. And then he kind of went on to take the win, and which I would have done the exact same thing, you know?
Sure. Yeah.
And so I just, at that point, I checked where Arlen was on the tracker, and he was still climbing Eldon. And being local, I was like, I knew exactly what we had left. I was like, dude, we can walk.
Let's just
and he's
walk
not
this.
catching us. So I
tell me
called my
about that.
wife and we started walking.
Okay. That's what I wanted to ask you about too. Okay. So this goes back to us just, asking about this 27-year partnership, but it was a really touching way to finish the event, and the video of you guys actually like holding hands, walking through the streets of Flagstaff was probably special in its own way. Say a few words about that.
Well, as soon as I called, my wife was really worried, and because she'd seen me at the last aid station, and they couldn't get anything to help me, and so I called her. I said, walk backwards on the course. I'm like, I'm walking it in. Harry just passed me, and I started walking. We met like on the edge of Buffalo Park. And then me and my crew chief and her, and we just walked it in together. And it was really cool because we had so many people we knew, like going to Hospital Hill. There were people that got off their, like nurses were off their shift that I knew that were standing on the corner that I said hi to. And like, I ran into Jamil, who was doing live feed with his phone, and so, and before he started filming me, he just came walking up, gave me a hug, and he had tears in his eyes. And like, I was like, dude, all choked up. And so, and I was a little out of it too. You're really tired. My O2 sat level was really low. It was 83 after sitting at the finish line for 30 minutes. So going over Eldon, it had to be in the 70s. That's why I felt like I was going to pass out on top.
So for our listeners, it just means that your blood oxygen saturation is so low, basically because you're not able to breathe as well as you normally would.
Yeah.
Because you're obviously acclimatized to the altitude.
Yeah.
So anyway.
And also, like, if you read anything online, anything in the 80s, it says go to the ER.
Right. That was like with COVID. It was like you need to go get on a ventilator or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, I ended up, just walking it in. It was awesome because so many people came out, and we've been in this town for about 3.5 years. So, we're still getting to know people and know the community. And my wife had this like moments of like, I don't like Flagstaff,
Yeah.
and this changed that.
Yeah.
like the community came out, like to see that. I think it was more impactful on my wife than it actually was on me because I was so out of it.
Right.
But, I was stoked to see everybody and all that. But, there was still like the disappointment of like, I wanted this course record. That was the goal, to smash the course record and win. And when you don't get that A goal and you lose it that close to the finish line, it's a little bittersweet. So I was a little low, as to say the least.
I'm sure. But again, it was a touching way to finish. And it just exemplified the 27-year partnership, and the visual of you guys just walking it in together, holding hands, is a pretty awesome tribute to the life you guys have created together. So let's talk about High Lonesome, but maybe first, as we begin to move towards the Colorado Trail, my thought was that I'd have you speak a little bit about the structure of the season, because it feels to me like Cocodona was an obviously perfect and valuable opportunity to test gear and systems and stuff that you'll ultimately apply on the CT. So maybe talk about that really quick before we touch on High Lonesome and then move to the big FKT project.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I made a lot of mistakes at Moab, but I could afford to make those. I had such a big lead during that race that I could make mistakes and still be fine. It wasn't a competition. And that set me up to make tweaks to Cocodona's plan, to test those new tweaks in a race situation where it mattered, because it was the competition was tight and strong. And so, you just had multiple threats. You didn't just have one guy. You had like 5 or 6, 7 guys, that could like potentially be up there. So, I just tested all those little things. Like, we worked on transitions. We worked on our sleeping system, of how to sleep, where to sleep, what to sleep on. We tried multiple things. We tried a cot with a pad. We tried a anti-gravity chair. We tried everything during Cocodona just to try it all and see what kind of stuck, throwing things against the wall. Thinking that I think I could do this in this chair, I think it'd be more, because we had tested it with Jesse Haynes when he'd won Moab last year.
Yep.
We crewed him one station at mile 200 and he took a 15-minute nap, and we did it in the chair. And the chair was like awesome, because you're like, they sit in the chair and then you're the crew and you just go, okay, man, you ready for a nap? I'm just going to tilt you back. Put you back, put a sleeping bag over him. Okay, wake up in 15 minutes, and like, he's out. As soon as he's done, you just sit him up, and then they like stand up and stumble out of the aid station, put their pack on and say, get out there, buddy.
Like the Undertaker memes, but just with some assistance from your crew. Yeah,
exactly. So we had tested that, and that was like, oh dude, I need to do that at Cocodona, So I used that at Cocodona, and we also made a mistake, like, trying to nap during the day when I wasn't really tired. That was a big like thing I learned, like wait till it hits and then you sleep. Don't sleep at like 4:00 in the afternoon.
Don't force it.
5 o'clock when you're not really tired. But once the light goes down, your body goes, oh, I need to go to sleep,
Right.
Especially by day 2. So I learned a lot from those kind of things, just playing with your like, circadian rhythm and like trying to trick the system and all that kind of stuff. And so I found some benefit to that, and there was a lot of that kind of testing, gear testing. Shoes was a big one, like figuring out which shoes I like the best for these long stuff. That came to the top of the pile during the second half of Cocodona.
Yeah.
I'd had some metatarsalgia at Moab that I was really nervous about going into Cocodona, and then just realized it was a shoe issue.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's come back and talk more about that, because I'm sure people will be interested in the systems that you're going to employ on the CT. But let's just touch briefly on High Lonesome, because it just happened, 2-3 weeks ago. You finished 4th, another just steady Eddie Browning 100-mile finish. And you posted on Strava that you felt sluggish in the first half, which you attributed to an experiment with more carbs in your nutrition. At least that's how I interpreted it.
It is true.
And okay, cool. So talk about that, because you then said that in reducing the carbs, it allowed you to rally later in the race, which is counterintuitive, especially in this age where everybody's talking about increasing.
Yeah, they're all talking about 120 grams an hour and stuff, right? 90, 120 grams an hour. This is all, we hear all this in coaching, right? It's all the rage right now. And, but as an OFM athlete and as a fat adapted athlete and really working on like my lifestyle nutrition to make my fat metabolism more enhanced, it's actually the opposite is true. And so one of the reasons that a lot of athletes come to us for this kind of change is because they've had GI stress. They puke, coming out the other end, all kinds of issues, right? And so we want to, or just being off in the gut. And I think one of the things that we really work on in our coaching business is like hydration and electrolyte balance and the right amount for you uniquely, and then also calories per hour. And I have always been under the philosophy is the opposite of what the mainstream is right now. And that is, what's the least amount of carbs we can have an hour per hour and still have solid energy, right? In these long races, right? Because we can really only metabolize about a gram of carbohydrate, a gram of carbohydrate to glycogen a minute. So, right, that's 60 grams an hour. Now, we could make some arguments for like throwing in fructose because it breaks down differently, and fructose versus straight carbs. So, like versus something like maltodextrin or something.
Yep.
But the biggest thing here is that 60 gram for most people is a pretty good like spot to start. Yeah. And I found that for me, I used to push high carb for 15 years before I did this. Right. And I always had garbage gut in the second half. Sometimes it was okay. Sometimes there was a puke, sometimes. But once I went to a little lower carb, I felt way better. I never had puke. I never felt off in the gut. That was not an issue anymore. And I found for me, that's somewhere in that 40 to 60 grams of carbohydrates per hour, somewhere in that range. And I find that I feel really good on that. And I've been doing that for years and years and years with no issues, no puking, no problems, no gut issues, no GI stress, right? So no toilet breaks during 100, that kind of stuff. But then with all the rage, of course, I also, part of this came from, and I should have known not to do this. This is so appropriate, right? Okay. Kyle Curtin is his Instagram handle is King of the Carbs. Right? Yep. So I paced him for mile 409 to mile 430, basically, of his Colorado Trail, Mullis Pass to Bolum Lake. Yeah. And we paced through the night, and that dude was still pushing like 4 scoops of tailwind in a flask, like at 409. Like he is the king of the carbs. So I was thinking, man, if I had a little higher concentration, I just have to take less sips. You know what I mean? And so I was messing around with higher concentration of tailwind in my flask than I normally would do. So normally I do a scoop and a half, like 150 calories in a flask and water in the other one. Yep. And then a gel every 45 minutes. Right. Yep. And so I was messing around with like 3 scoops. So double the ration. And I just felt sluggish the whole first half. My gut was a little off. And when your gut's off, this, dude, you puke sometimes. Like, when your gut's off, it's hard to be focused just on like pushing or racing or anything. You're just like, ugh. Yeah. And that's what I felt like the whole first half. I would come into aid stations, and my wife, who's crewed for me a bunch of times, and she knows she knows me. We've been talking about this. She's reading me. And normally I'm in like, direct in traffic. Like, I need this, I need that. Okay, give me that. Boom, I'm out. Like 30 seconds. I'm like looking for a chair at mile 50. She's like, what is going on with you? And finally I figured it out after that aid station. I dumped my flask like half. And it was still full, and I was having trouble sipping it. So I dumped it in half. I had a filter flask. I topped it all off and diluted it. And then I just drank like 150 calories an hour for like 2 hours of just liquid, no gels, took out all food. And I just all of a sudden, like, boom, like I felt myself. And then I just started like
So interesting
rolling.
and counterintuitive, isn't it? It makes me want to ask you, like when you have so much experience and your method has clearly worked over such a long time, there can be a reluctance to change your approach. And it feels like this is evidence to the contrary of like, hey, I'm still learning, I'm still tinkering, I'm still trying to improve in different ways, and obviously absorbing some of the new sort of like, whatever's hot in the conversation in trail and ultra running. So maybe if you could speak about that a little bit, like what has been your relationship with learning and evolving, especially, as you've gained so much experience? Like, is there an internal resistance to like sort of ossifying that you have? Because I think that's probably a valuable trait to acquire as we age, is just like a willingness to continue learning and changing.
Well, I've always been that way. I'm always a tinkerer.
Yeah.
I'm always tinkering with something, whether it's gear or cutting something off my shoes or, like cutting tags off stuff, trying, like looking for the Shangri-La of whatever, it's always like the eternal quest for like the perfect piece of something, whether it's gear or food or whatever. So I'm always doing that. But like, there's certain things that I keep coming back to that I keep tinkering with, and I stray, and then it just like confirms that I need to stick to what, if it ain't, the old saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Like, sometimes that's pretty true. And so like with nutrition, if you find something that works for you, that's probably something not to tinker with, right? Yep. And that was my lesson out of this. It cost me, because once I started rallying at the end, like I surged way forward, and like I got to like within 4 minutes of third at the end and closing on him big time. And looking back, like second was only 30 minutes in front of me. If I would have just done my normal nutrition, I probably would have been at least 30 minutes faster. But like hindsight's 2020, and we can, wax poetic or whatever. But like it doesn't change the fact that I made mistakes. I tinkered. I needed to do that before the Colorado Trail. Yep. Just to make sure, and then that solidified my plan for nutrition too. It's
such a good lesson, in your third decade running ultras, you're still learning. That's what makes it so fun and so addictive. All right, Colorado Trail. We got to spend the rest of our time here on this upcoming FKT attempt. For those who don't know, you just mentioned Kyle Curtin. He just broke the record, he just sort of shattered the record, it seemed to me. So the record's only, I think, 5-6 weeks old at this point. Kyle Curtin is a Durango local, from what I understand. I don't know him personally, but he's obviously got a lot of long trail experience, and he's a great 100-mile runner too. So maybe share a little bit more about those 20 miles that you spent with him through the night as he was closing out his FKT on the Colorado Trail. Share a little bit about your guys' relationship, and like what's motivating you to go after this FKT this year.
So I mean, to give a little quick background, I've been wanting to do the Colorado Trail for a long time. I just could never fit in my schedule. It never worked with like how my job or anything like that. But now that I'm a coach and I have assistant coaches under me now, and I'm like, I've built the space to be able to do something like this. And so it's been on my list for a long, long time in some capacity. I wanted to do it, but And I also felt like I needed to do some 200s to get the experience under my belt for the long stuff. And so that's kind of the background of why I'm doing it. It's been a kind of a bucket list for a long time. But it was more like, one of those bucket lists that's way down the list that you're like, I'd love to do it, but I don't know if it ever happened. Yeah. And so that's one. The other was, I coach Mike McKnight, and he got it back in 2020. He broke the record, and the overall record. So for those who don't know, there's a northbound, southbound. So there's 4 variations of the Colorado Trail. There's northbound, southbound, Durango to Denver, Denver to Durango, and then there's a collegiate east and a collegiate west, because there's a 160-mile loop in the middle, south of Leadville, where the Collegiate Peaks area, where the trail splits in two. And so you can do Collegiate East or Collegiate West. Collegiate West is the higher alpine. Collegiate East is lower down in the trees. So High Lonesome's on part of both of those trails, part of the collegiate loop.
For our listeners, Courtney DeWalter last year did the collegiate loop, which is in itself is a cool FKT that you can go after. And I'll make sure to link to the FKT page in the show notes so people can check out what we're talking about here. Keep going.
Yeah. So anyway, Kyle this year was doing southbound because he lives in Durango. So he wanted to finish in his hometown. And so he started in Denver, and he was going. So each one has its own record, supported, unsupported, and self-supported. So he was doing supported southbound collegiate west. That record was held by Joe Grant. I think it was like 8 days and 2 hours or something. And then, but there's also always been an overall fastest time, meaning out of all four, there's always someone who's on one of them and it's moved a couple of times, but it's always been, the fastest one's always been northbound collegiate east. And that's what Mike McKnight had the fastest time, 7 days, 13 hours. So Kyle was going for his direction, 8 hours, 8 days, 2 hours, but also was trying to get the overall. He and I talked before. We had he's an ultra teammate, has been for years. We've known each other. We've raced against each other. Anyway, we had hung out in May before the thing before his attempt. And I was like, dude, I also coach his girlfriend, Sarah Osazuski. So we have a whole circle, right? That we know each other and and so this year we really started hanging out at this ultra event. He and I really pretty tight. And then we started talking. I'm like, dude, I can help you. I'm going to be training for like High Lonesome, and I need to get some altitude training. And I'm going for the Colorado Trail too later in the summer. So I need to be at altitude. So I'll pace, and let's talk about it. Somewhere near Durango, I'll come up and I'll train in the San Juans, and then I'll jump in with you one of the sections. And so that's kind of where it went. And then I ended up pacing him, and he smashed the record, 6 days, 15 hours, first person to go under 7 days. In my head, I was thinking, yeah, I want to go under 7 days when I was planning mine. And he said he wanted to go under 7 days, and he had stated that to me. And so I knew, and I had his spreadsheet and everything because, I was on his pacing crew. Yep. And that's another thing I love about this sport. Like, no one's keeping their stuff like hidden.
Right.
Like, he's just sharing it with me, and like I'll share stuff right back, And
right.
so anyway, we were kind of putting our heads together and talking about it. We've talked about it quite a bit. And then so I jumped in and went down and trained in the San Juans for the last weekend he was supposed to finish, and because he finished on a Sunday night. And so I jumped in and paced him from Molus to Bolum, which is like 21 miles. A whole night shift, like 1:30 in the morning, but he rolled in at like 11 something, almost midnight. And I just remember he'd come through a big rainstorm, and I saw him peel off his socks and looked at his feet. Oh, and I was like, do I really want to do this? What am I signed up for? I have to say, I was a little scared but then the crazy thing is, took a 90-minute nap. We get up, we're back on the trail at 1:30 in the morning, and he's like chipper, like good attitude, like taking tailwind every 20 minutes. I'm handing him a tailwind every 20 minutes, a flask to chug, hold him his filter flask, chug, then next 20 minutes to give him a gel, he'd chug, so like he just still was putting down gels and tailwind at mile 409. And I just was like, I was really impressed with his attitude on the trail. Like, that was which is hard to coach, right? You can't really you can't coach that.
Yeah.
You have to embrace like what you're in at the moment and not be like going down this negative trail, right? Of like mentally, this sucks. What am I doing? And, I think the only time I'd hear him complain is when he'd like, when you stub your toe a little on something. And he's
nothing worse than that.
Yeah, especially at mile 4 or something, mile 420. You're like, ugh. So that
would ruin my attitude. I'd quit on the spot if I stubbed my toe at mile 420. Dude.
So I mean, just to see him still rolling like 3.6 miles an hour average in our segment through the night, he was still rolling 3.6 miles an hour average. It was just really impressive, and so it was inspiring, I have to say. And for me, I was like, if I'm going to get this, I got to take it to this level plus another level.
Right. Okay. So let's get to that in a second. First, tell me the variation that you're going to be doing. Are you going the same way as Kyle?
I'm doing the exact same course as him, but in the opposite direction. So I'm doing northbound Durango to Denver, Collegiate West.
Why? What are the considerations there? Why do you prefer that way?
I wanted to do the San Juans when I was fresh. I mean, you've been there, dude. They're hard
yes.
and they're beautiful. And I didn't want to be in tunnel vision through the San Juans. I wanted to be like, yeah, woo, first 2 days, San Juans, Colorado Trails, Continental Divide Trail combined. And they're up above Maggie and Maggie Gulch on the Colorado Trail or on the Hard Rock course and sweet sections of the Colorado Trail there. Amazing buff single track.
I've never been on that, but I know people who say that it's just spectacular through there.
I mean, above Cunningham, Highland Mary and Green Mountain and all that area. It's just when you're up there.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to be kind of somewhat fresh for those sections just because I wanted to enjoy them. And then, when you're running down to Denver, you're in tunnel vision by the end anyway. You're sleep deprived, just trying to look at the trail and not trip. I just, anticipating where you are mentally, that I'd rather be hitting there's a little more buff trails. It's more well-traveled as you get closer to Denver on the Front Range. So it's less technical. So that's why I chose that direction. I thought that just for me, that's just what spoke to me.
But you will be doing Collegiate West, the same variation that.
Yeah, it goes over Hope Pass. Yeah, cool. Through
because from what I understand, so I was doing some reading about Kyle's attempt, and he made it seem like, okay, I want to do the West variation because that is considered the slower variation, and if I'm going to set the overall FKT, I want it to be unifying. Do you subscribe to that philosophy? Is that why you would do Collegiate West?
Yeah, I want to do Collegiate West because it's a harder one too. It's cooler. It's way more, it's up high above tree line. Whereas the Collegiate East is literally, and if anybody's run High Lonesome, it's the last part of that trail, where you're in the windy, rocky, it goes slightly down into a drainage, slightly out of the drainage, slightly into a drainage, slightly out. It's like a zigzag in the trees. There's no views. And it's
so it's faster, but it's not as aesthetically satisfying.
Pleasing. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. And I'm a mountain runner, man. I want to be up there where I can see. I just rather do the harder one.
Super, super cool. So when I was at TrailCon, a guy came up and introduced himself to me. He said, "Hey, Jeff Browning's running the Colorado Trail." I hadn't heard this yet. I said, "What? This is breaking news." Oh my goodness. And who are you? And he said, "Hey, I'm from the Warrior Trail Foundation, and Jeff's going to be doing a fundraiser as part of this FKT attempt for our organization." So before we go any further, introduce us to the foundation, how you came to be connected with them, and why it felt like they were the perfect partner for this project.
Well, the founder, Chris Ropp, I coach him. We met in 2022 when I won Moab. He was in the race, and he likes to joke that he was at mile 114 halfway through when I crossed the finish line. So he's a back of the pack guy. He's in his 50s. He didn't start running until his 50s. He is a combat vet, multiple tours, Afghanistan, Iraq, and has PTSD. And he started a foundation about 10 years ago that was more to get into it was more skiing and other outdoor recreation stuff for veterans with PTSD to help with outdoor therapy. But then he got into ultra running, and he got introduced to 200s first. So he got introduced to the long stuff, and he got into it. And it really helped with his PTSD. And he was really stoked about that. And he was like, I need to pivot my foundation to just trail and ultra running because it helps so much, right? We have to be out there. We have to do the work. We have to be accountable. The community aspect of ultras, right? As we were talking about earlier, how we're sharing information on a fastest known time attempt, right? Like Kyle and I are. And just, I think that, even in the front of the pack, we've talked about it, but in the middle and the back of the pack, especially, a lot of the people I coach are mid back of the packers. Like there's a camaraderie there. They get in. Sometimes we're on the same pace for 20 miles, and they get in together and team up and help each other through aid stations and through the low spots. And then they end up being lifelong friends from that point forward, right? If you want to learn something about somebody, go for a 6-hour run with them in the mountains, and you know them pretty well by the end of that 6 hours.
And you're probably best friends for life afterwards. Yeah,
exactly. And that's why when he told me the vision for his foundation, that he was going to pivot it to this, and said something about, would you be interested in doing I was like, yes. One, I have tons of family that are in the military or in law enforcement. I feel like the military doesn't get as much love from our government as it should when they come back, and sometimes a shell of themselves, right? And so I feel like this was my way of giving back, because I feel like it's a very, there's been so many things over the years I've been involved with from nonprofits, but this was one of those that was this makes a huge difference. Yeah. And I also, he said, would you be interested in helping, coach, your coaching business, teaming up with the foundation to help coach these veterans that we're going to sponsor. So what they do is basically sponsor veterans, get them trail and ultra running coaching. $3,000 donation gives, basically you're sponsoring someone for a year.
Yeah.
And it helps them be successful, right? Because what does coaching do? It gets them, one, it's going to accelerate their knowledge. It's going to help them not get injured, not have setbacks, have accountability. So all these things that helps them stay in the sport and not fall off the rails, right? Because one of the things I've learned after coaching a lot of veterans over the years is they have the military mindset of no pain, no gain, and they'll push themselves to where they're injured, or they'll overdo it, right? Or they've lost their ability to be intuitive, right? Because part of ultra running is being intuitive of yourself. Am I pushing too hard right now? I need to back off a little bit,
because there's a culture of obedience and following orders and stuff. That
exactly.
You outsource that intuition to somebody else. So you help them reconnect.
You're helping them reconnect with their intuition, right? So I say your intuition is not a bad thing, right? You need to embrace that piece of yourself that you've learned to not embrace, right? And sometimes they get it quickly, and sometimes it takes a long time to relearn that. But that's part of coaching, right? Part of being a coach. And so with all of that, I was just really stoked because that demographic, the military vet demographic, they have a way higher rate of suicide, of drug addiction, alcohol addiction, abuse, divorce, all these things. They come back, they have trouble assimilating back in. And this gives them some of their a connection to almost being in a unit again. Yeah. Right. Because think about it. We're a tribe, man. We all meet up in cool outdoor spaces and camp in the San Juans and then run for 10 days, or whatever. And so there's just so many cool aspects of our sport that create this extended community and camaraderie that I think one of the reasons that it's a successful therapy for PTSD. And that's why I was super stoked to help with this, and to be honest, it's a newer foundation. And so anybody out there listening, I'm going to do the selfish plug, and that is donate. We need cash. This foundation needs cash. It's a young foundation. It's new. We want to sponsor these guys and girls and get them into coaching. And so they don't make mistakes in ultra running, and they can do this sport for a long time. And I love it because I care about longevity. And so longevity, this is part of it. This is part of the longevity project of the Colorado Trail, of my longevity, of this culmination of 24 years of ultra running. I think, I finally found something I could get behind that I'm super stoked about. Yeah. And so for me, it gives me skin in the game because I know people are watching. I know we're raising money. I know that I'm trying to support these these men and women with PTSD, like it's not just Jeff doing this selfish, like, endeavor. It's bigger than me.
That'll help with the attitude component, hopefully at about mile 420 or so. Very cool, though. Right before we recorded, Freetrail made a donation to the Warrior Trail Foundation in Jeff's name, and we're excited to be at least a small supporter of their efforts, and what a worthy cause it is. I'll make sure to put a link in the show notes so that our listeners can go participate as well and root Jeff on the trail while also making a difference in the lives of American combat veterans. Okay, so back to the run itself. Kyle managed to do 3 miles an hour for the entire 6 days, 15 hours.
3.12 miles an hour.
Not that you've done the math or anything. But obviously, yeah, I mean, you smashed the record. First guy to go under 7 hours. That 3.1 whatever.
7 days.
Yeah. 7 days, excuse me. But that 3.1 and change includes all of his stop time. So it's quite an average. Having never really spent much time on the trail myself, it's hard to see a lot of margin, but clearly, there's a new standard that you're going to have to, try to beat at this point. So where do you see the margin? How are you going to approach it in a way that's going to give you a shot to better Kyle's ridiculously stout record?
I think the biggest one is logistics and transitions. And that's always what I've owned people on. So it's got to be that. It's going to be the transitions, and it's got to be the where we transition, sleep, change, eat, those kind of things, resupply. I think Kyle, it's a couple of things that stood out to me with Kyle is that he definitely took the supported category. I had to go back and read the rules on supported category of FKTs. And it's like, yeah, you can carry stuff for people. If you have a pacer the whole time, you can carry. So we're working on having pacers the whole time, just like Kyle did. I mean, I feel like FKTs have as our sport has raised the bar over the last decade, as you've been around this sport a long time.
Yeah.
And it has just keeps raising. And so it's become more pro and more professional and more professional. And so the FKTs are no different. Like it used to be like, hey, yeah, you might have a couple people jump in and help you resupply a few spots, but you're carrying most of your own stuff. Now it's like, no, if you want to break 7 days or you want to break 6 days, 15 hours and 8 minutes, you've got to do all the little stuff. Right. Yeah. And that means people carrying stuff for you.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying, which is a cool aspect, because that's you have to ask, you have to be like, hey, are you willing to pace, or you want to help? I've had a ton of people reach out. That's been really cool. We've got a pretty cool list of people. I've got multiple of my own athletes that I coach. Some of the guys that are some of my faster guys wanted to jump in. I've got Scott Jurek stepped up, Darcy Paisus,
yes.
Devin Yang.
Darcy commented on your post announcing this, saying, hey, call me, I'm in for pacing.
Yeah. So it's been cool to have people step up that, I've known in the sport a long, long time, that are legends in their own right, just to want to help, just like I wanted to help Kyle. So it's just that's the cool thing about our sport. People are willing just to step up. Jesse Haynes is coming. Kira Henniger is coming.
Nice.
They're going to help the first 3 or 4 days. I've got multiple guys that stepped up to the plate. I've got Kyle Curtin's going to jump in. Sarah Ostazuski is going to jump in. So to pace and help. So it's been awesome to see everyone kind of, reach out.
So on the subject of dominating people in transitions, it makes me want to just share what happened at Chapman last year when I was laying in the cot. Wanting to DNF at Hard Rock. I'm laying there just feeling so sorry for myself in between naps. And all of a sudden I hear the aid station captain, Bill Shum, say, bib number 1, Jeff Browning in. And then 30 seconds later, bib number 1, Jeff Browning out without a pacer. And I was like, yeah, totally on brand Jeff Browning, completely executing a flawless Hard Rock for whatever, the 7th time while I'm laying here in a cot. He's dominating me in a transition. So back to the logistics though, because I think, this is probably one of the biggest challenges of it. I'm sure listeners would love to hear you talk about your process of like figuring it out and like mapping out where you're going to be receiving crew, where you're going to be plugging people in, and how you just approach it logistically. So any color you can add about like on what interval you're going to be able to get resupply and how you're just formulating this 500-mile effort in your brain leading up to your start in a couple weeks.
Well, the biggest thing was a spreadsheet hell. Yeah, I've been in spreadsheet purgatory for a while. It's so logistically heavy. And so just like even making, I luckily have, Chris has a buddy named John Hayward, the founder of Chris, the founder of Warrior Trail Foundation. Those two guys are my crew B, and then I have a crew A. And so I have two crews. They can leapfrog, they can crew together, or they can like give each other breaks to sleep. So that's the plan by having two crews. And so that way we're not. One thing I saw Kyle do is his crew guy Michael was pretty strung out by the end, and because I saw him the last night, and so I was like, he shouldn't be behind a wheel, So. Me as a dad with, kids that drive and like, I don't want that guy behind the wheel right now. He shouldn't be behind the wheel. So I just wanted to like kind of try to have two crews so they could manage sleep. And so they could be alert. And also be able to shuttle pacers if we needed to and shuttle vehicles. So having two-man crews is kind of how we were focusing on that. And then, so that's one of the pieces of this. The other is that most of the access points are anywhere from the shortest is probably 2.5 hours between checkpoints, and the farthest is like 7 or 8 almost. So there's a lot of 4 to 6 hour sections between crew spots, and a lot of driving for the crew. So what we've really worked on is, and John Hayward, this guy is like, well, I'm calling him the I've been jokingly calling him the spreadsheet wizard, because he's fast packed the Colorado Trail. So he already had a base spreadsheet for fast packing, and he just took that and tweaked it, and then like added a bunch of extra formulas. And we have like ins and outs, time transitions. We have a column for time transitions in every checkpoint. We have we have a column of vert up, column of vert down in that segment, and then I can plug in my average pace on ups and average pace on downs, and then that reformulates through the whole spreadsheet to tell you when you're going to come in, what time of day, and the date. So like Tuesday at 3:57 p.m., And so we have the in and outs, we have the transition times that figures in the transition times and then spits out numbers and dates. And so we have all of that. And then I have a notes section for like nutrition, kind of what I want, and that kind of stuff. Pacer column, who's jumping in for what section. That's like its own puzzle on people's availability. Like, and I have one thing I think that Kyle did really well, I thought was smart, was he did something called pacer expectations. And he gave you a one sheet, pacer expectations with bullets. So one, he's like saying, hey, get ready to you're carrying my crap. So like bring a pack that can carry my stuff too. But like just, stuff like, pace expectations and kind of what app to have downloaded and know the water sources on your segment, all that kind of stuff,
God, so much to consider, isn't there?
Yeah, like you got to think about filtering water on a 20-mile segment, right?
Yeah.
Or else you got to carry a ton of water, right? So like just knowing the water sources, the Far Out app for the Colorado Trail is probably the best one out there. It's like for all the long trails, it's kind of the app, because you can download the entire thing and be on airplane mode on your phone. But it gives you like water sources, like seasonal, creek, river, lake, and it tells you everything along the route and all the access points.
And there's probably a user generated aspect to it where people who've done the trail recently can tell you, hey, this creek's not running right now or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Really interesting.
Yeah, the logistics are crazy, dude. It's like a giant puzzle.
It's insane. I mean, and then you got to go run 500 fucking miles for God's sake.
Dude, there's like 33 access points. So think of it like that. 33 aid stations.
Yeah.
There's 33 aid stations. Like it's a lot. It's a lot.
Yeah. I mean, that's really interesting. So if the margin is in the transitions rather than on the trail, that gives you basically 33 opportunities to be hyper focused and execute, and then just, obviously take care of business when you're on the trail. But it makes me want to sort of bring things full circle. And, you mentioned sort of the sleep that you were tinkering with at Cocodona. And obviously we talked about your sort of nutrition stuff at High Lonesome. Those are obviously going to be two critical factors on the CT. Maybe take them both individually if you can. Just share a little bit about how you're going to approach the sleep element for what will hopefully be 6 days and change, and then how you're going to be feeling yourself.
The hardest thing I think is like knowing that you don't get a lot of sleep. I mean, probably 90 minutes to 3 hours is the most in one setting. I'll probably start taking some shorter naps after 48 hours, like before you go into the night. So like, 20-minute nap before you go into the dark or around dark. That's kind of general concept of how we coach, at least like back of the Packers and 200s and 250s, is that like 90-minute REM cycle every night, sometime in the night. And then I'm taking a couple of 3 hours. I know Kyle did a 5-hour one night when he had a big storm was going on. He woke up to get back up and he was like, heck with that. And he went back to sleep. So I know he had one big sleep and then a bunch of 90s, and then some dirt naps. I'm trying to avoid.
I read that Kyle did a total of 12 hours of sleeping in 6 days and change.
Yeah, probably not that much.
Wow.
Right. So I'm looking at like trying to sleep something every night, a short amount, like at least one REM cycle, 90 minutes, and then a lot of little short naps before dark. Trying to minimize dirt naps as much as possible. I feel like in 200s, I feel like they're kind of a waste. Like they just a tease, It's like, everybody in the bar's doing shots and you get one drop in your mouth,
Yeah.
So like
by that you mean just like crashing on the side of the trail for a bit. You feel like it's
like a short
not actually
one.
Restful, not productive.
Yeah, you need to go horizontal and try to make, so being proactive, I think that's probably one of the big things we'll work on, is trying not to dirt nap and only plan specific sleeps. And that'll have to evolve on the fly depending on pace and where we are at certain times. We have a general plan, but it can pivot if we needed to. It's got to be flexible a little bit. That's one thing I've learned in the 200s. There's sometimes when you're coming somewhere and you're faster than you thought you're going to be, and it's like, wait, it's not dark yet. Like I'm not even tired.
Yeah.
And I had a 20-minute planned sleep, so like, then you don't do it. One thing I've learned is you don't do it.
You skip
If you're not tired, you don't do it.
Okay.
You don't try to force it.
What about the nutrition part? Obviously, we already talked about your sort of, I don't know, just kind of like counterintuitive approach at High Lonesome. And this is going to be 6 or 7 full days of nonstop stress on the system. How do you fuel yourself while you're on the trail? And if there's anything that about the preventing the breakdown too. I mean, like that feels like an important part.
Well, tailwind and gels will be like on the move stuff. And then real food in between at checkpoints. And I'll definitely carry some other stuff like I like salted plantain chips and gummy bears, organic gummy bears. During on the move too. But like at aid stations, I'm going to focus on protein and fat mainly. Really good food. I've already got a local guy here that I get eggs from that is going to supply me with like 6 dozen eggs from his chickens.
Nice.
And so I got free range eggs, local free range eggs. I'll do like eggs, mashed potatoes, soups and bone broths. But the one thing Kyle's the king of the carbs, but one thing I watched is like he had pretty low quality food there, like quick made cheap stuff. And I was like, that's not me. I can't do that.
Yeah,
it'll be high quality organic or free range or something, grass fed. Whatever I can get.
Free range 3 egg omelet, at mile 300. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
That's where the margin is.
Yeah. And I won't have Coke. I'll have like prebiotic cola, and my wife's already working on like, what balms to put on my legs and, supplements to take daily, like, a ration every day of stuff. To make sure you're getting enough stuff and just making sure we're getting enough protein too, to prevent as much breakdown as we can.
Fascinating. Well, any thoughts in your brain as you approach this adventure of a lifetime, as you called it, like other things that we haven't touched on? Like we were talking about before we press record, it would be great to have you come back on after you're finished and we can do a deeper debrief on it. But you've got more experience in the sport than 100% of people who listen to this show. And I'm sure people would love to get a final glimpse into the mind of Jeff Browning before the adventure of a lifetime.
I mean, I think the biggest thing for me is just like trying to get my mind ready for that long of an effort. I think that's probably like the unknown because I've never done anything this long. And so just having that unknown can be a little like, there can be some anxiety that comes along with that if you can't manage it. So I think my biggest thing over this last 2 weeks is just focusing on logistics, focusing on planning and finalizing in the taper all the stuff, all the little puzzle pieces. Hopefully that'll keep me distracted enough between that and the track and field Olympics. I just finally got around to like streaming the 10,000 last night. I was like, oh my gosh, that was an amazing event.
Such a good race.
Yeah. So for me, it's just focusing on the planning right now to keep my mind off the actual thing. Cause once I'm in it, like for me, I'll embrace it. You know what I mean? Like I'm going to like look around and like the cool thing about doing something long. And this is why I like one of the things that kind of attracts me to 200s after all the years of racing. Because hundreds, you got to kind of run them hard. Yeah, you gotta go to the pain cave a little bit, right? There's a reason that Courtney talks about the pain cave so much, and chiseling it out. Because hundreds are like a pain cave endeavor, and where this is its own pain cave, but in a different way because you're not running at a pace that you have to hammer. You're running at a pace and you're hiking hills, so you can actually look around and enjoy the view, and like you're not just looking at the trail and like focusing on running. So I think that's what I'm looking forward to, is embracing that piece of it when we're on the trail, is like embracing every single day, every inch of that trail, enjoying it, because it might be the only time I do that whole trail as one big thing. Right. Yeah. And so I think it's one of those things that it's not lost on me that the opportunity to do it and the people who are getting behind me to support it and taking time out of their lives to support it, that I need to embrace how cool of a project it is and really enjoy every step.
Is there any fear? Because I'm just remembering now that Kyle ended up in the hospital afterwards. So we've talked about how there's little margin for error here. It was some combination of his ankle being non-operative upon finishing in Durango and probably some rhabdo that he dealt with after his FKT. Is there any fear in your brain going into something like this?
Not really, because Kyle and I over this, we're a little tighter than we used to be. Like we just knew each other as teammates, but this is kind of with him dating Sarah and like all this kind of circle where we've kind of like our paths have crossed more lately. I took him and Sarah to dinner in Durango on the way back from High Lonesome, because we got a hotel room in Durango on the way there and on the way back. My wife and my youngest son, and we took them to dinner, and he and I were chatting. We shut the place down, like having some margaritas and like talking about the Colorado Trail. And so he was kind of filling me in on what happened at the hospital. And, really what happened, he went in for his ankle. He had kind of slightly rolled it a little bit at like 300, and then the tendon on the top that makes you flex was really irritated, and it was bothering him on the downhills a little bit when we were he gets zingers every once in a while when I was pacing him in the 400s, right? Because I was the last full night I paced him, the last full night he was out on the trail, and so then he finished the next night, right, at like 11 o'clock at night. So anyway, he ends up like he goes home, sleeps, gets up the next morning, and he can't move his ankle. It's ballooned up. He can't weight it. He lives on a second floor. So he can't get, he has no elevator. So he's just like, I got to go to the doctor, and see, I got to get an x-ray and see if this thing's like broken or torn or what's going on. I mean, it ended up being really bad tendonitis, right? It's just super irritated. Like when your tendon gets irritated and then you run on another 200 miles, well, it's going to be pretty swollen up. So he went and got it x-rayed, but it's funny because, mainstream medical, as soon as you tell him he told him what he did, they go into freak out mode, right? They're like, we got to run some tests, And so they start running tests on him. Well, of course he's going to have a little rhabdo. He just ran for 6 days straight.
If he didn't have rhabdo, that would be concerning, right?
But he showed me on the app from the hospital all the tests, like they run electrolytes and everything else. He was like in the green on everything. He just his CK panel for rhabdo, right? So under 500 or 400 is normal, but really 0 to 1,000 is normal, and 1,000 to 5,000 is mild rhabdo. I guarantee most people after 100 or 200 are in mild rhabdo.
Mild rhabdo.
His number was 1,700.
It's funny because that caused a little bit of an internet firestorm, as always happens nowadays. But anyway,
because it's out of context, right?
Of course, totally. All right, well, good. Well, that's good to hear. I hope Kyle continues to recover well, and it's awesome that he's going to be on the support crew for you when you start on the 18th of August. How can people follow along? Are you going to have a spot tracker on you?
Yeah, I'll have a spot tracker. Right now, the best place to go is
just your Instagram.
My Instagram, and I'll have all links for like the tracker and stuff will be put in my bio. But you can also go to my Instagram for like if you want to give to the foundation. There's a link to how to give and the project page on warriortrail.org. But my Instagram bio is probably the best place to get information as we're also talking to like Mountain Outpost about maybe a daily update in the mornings.
That would be sick.
So and because both our crews are going to have Starlink, so we'll be able to like connect. So we're hoping that the crew would be willing to like do an update on most mornings. I'll be on the move. I'm not planning on hanging out and talking to you guys
do a quick interview before you hit the trail.
Yeah, maybe they get me leaving if they're lucky. But those are the main ones. Just Instagram or warriortrail.org on the project page. You can.
Well, I'll make sure to link to both in the show notes. And as I said before, I would definitely encourage all of our listeners to go chip in and support the foundation as part of Jeff's effort on the Colorado Trail. Jeff, as I mentioned at the beginning, we end these conversations now in the same place for everybody. So I got to ask you our traditional closing question. That is, who is one person that you admire? Can be inside or outside of sport, living or dead. Why do you admire that person?
Well, it has to be Steve Prefontaine, because I for me, he was the first person that I learned about when I really when I moved away from mountain biking and really got into running. And I went on because I had been a late bloomer to running, even though I ran the whole time through my 20s and teens. I was not really didn't consider myself a runner. I consider myself a mountain biker and climber. And when I got into running and really got into ultras, I learned about Steve Prefontaine. I lived in Eugene for one winter, and that's when I learned about him. When I lived there, I learned about his Pre's Trail. Who's Pre, And started looking him up, and I was like, whoa, okay. And then I started watching documentaries. And so I liked him because, one, he did the work every day. One fact that I think is really cool about him is that he never, in 4 years at U of O, he never missed a workout. Never missed a workout. even when he was sick, he wouldn't tell his coach, that he was sick. He'd just show up and work. And so I really appreciate his work ethic. And I thought he was a fierce competitor. Like, just to watch him in the 72 Munich games, like for him to like be his age and like just take the lead the last mile, against a bunch of experience. Like, it was, Lasse Viren was in that, dude. Like, that was amazing. For that guy, he was just fierce. And I really appreciate that fierceness and the work ethic. So that's why he is my pick.
What a perfect answer. I hope you embody the spirit of Pre out on the trail, but maybe pace yourself. You don't need to be as aggressive.
You don't have to be a front runner.
Yeah, right. Well, dude, good luck on the CT. Let's be in touch about maybe connecting for a post FKT pod. But yeah, I wish you nothing but the best, and I'll be following along while you're on the trail.
Thanks, Debo. I appreciate it, man.